The first sound was a hammer. Soft, slow, deliberate. Not like a carpenter rushing to meet a deadline, but like someone trying not to wake a child sleeping in the next room. Inside a small, dimly lit workshop tucked behind an old service station, a man was building a coffin. Not for the dead. This one had hinges and padding, a small curtain inside made from an old flannel shirt. It wasn't painted or polished, just wood, raw, honest. Cal Bishop stood over it, sleeves rolled to his elbows, sawdust in the lines of his fingers. He wasn't a craftsman by trade, not anymore. He used to be. Now he drove a funeral van, quiet work, no small talk required. A single bulb hung above him, flickering every now and then. The morning sun hadn't yet reached the hills of Dry Ridge, New Mexico. The town never really lit up anyway. He set the lid in place gently like he was tucking someone in. Behind him, a small voice spoke. "Is that for me?" Cal turned. June stood barefoot at the doorway, one sock in her hand, hair in a half-done braid. She was 9, but grief had aged her. She spoke with the calm curiosity of someone who had already seen too much. He nodded. "It's for when we stay at Nana's again. You said her beds creak. This won't creak." She walked up, touching the edge of the boss, tracing the wood grain. "It smells like the inside of the shed," she said. "It's pine. So yeah, probably does." She didn't ask more. She just looked at it thoughtful, then whispered, "It's nice." And that was enough. He ruffled her hair gently. "Cereal, then shoes. We're late." By 7:10, Cal had loaded June into the van. Not the family car, they didn't have one anymore. Just the long black vehicle with no rear seats and a faint smell of lilies that never left. He always opened her door first. Always. She pulled out a plastic lunchbox with faded glitter and opened her sketchbook. She drew while he drove. Trees. Mostly trees. Sometimes with eyes. They passed a field of abandoned oil pumps. The metal beast stood still now, jaws locked in mid-bite. At the edge of the horizon, a hawk circled low. The desert here was dry, but not silent. The school building rose like a brick rectangle out of gravel. There was no playground, just a dirt patch and a few weeds. Cal pulled up across the street, as he always did, never wanting the funeral van seen too close to the front. "You good?" he asked. June nodded. "Want me to bring you something from library?" He smiled. "Surprise me." She opened the door herself. That was new. She'd started doing that since last fall. Cal watched her walk toward the gate. She didn't run, she didn't skip, but she turned back once and gave a little wave. It was the kind of wave that asked, "You still watching?" He was. He waited until she went inside, then pulled away. The town was already warming up. Patches of tar shimmered on the road. He adjusted the rear-view mirror, nothing but empty velvet in the back. Sometimes he forgot what he carried. The van rolled past an old diner with one booth still boarded up from a fire last winter, past the gas station where nobody pumped gas anymore, past the last mailbox on Main, which leaned just slightly like it had once been struck by something and never quite recovered. At 8:20, he arrived at Rose & Sons mortuary. The receptionist waved. Cal nodded. There were no funerals today, just a transport job, small-town rotation, no questions asked. He parked the van, walked around the back, opened the double doors. The air inside was cooler. He stood there for a long time, looking into the empty space meant for what was no longer here. Then he reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a small wooden box. It wasn't fancy, just pine. 4 corners dovetailed tight. He set it in the back, not for delivery, just so he wouldn't have to carry it in his hands anymore. Inside the book, a small drawing. Trees with eyes drawn in a child's pencil. Cal closed the doors slow and even. He walked back to the front, sat behind the wheel, and for a few minutes, he didn't start the engine. He just sat there, hands on the steering wheel. The van wasn't moving, but something inside him was trying to say, keep going, not because things would get better, but because a little girl with one sock and a sketchbook still waited to be picked up at 3:10. And he would be there. The house wasn't really a house. It was a prefab trailer parked behind the old service station that Cal never sold. Inside, one couch, one stove, and one table that tilted slightly to the left. June sat at that table now, legs swinging under her chair, fork dancing in her mashed potatoes. Cal had made dinner the same way he always did. Boiled carrots, boxed potatoes, and frozen meatloaf, cut into 2 uneven slices. They didn't pray. They didn't need to. The hum of the old fridge filled the room. Somewhere under the trailer, a pipe clicked every 6 seconds like a clock with no hands. June chewed slowly, thought carefully, then said, "Do you think Mom knew?" Cal looked up. Knew what? That it was the end, that she wasn't coming back. He didn't answer right away. He set down his fork, rubbed a thumb over the callus on his palm. "I don't know," he said finally. "But if she did," June went on, "do you think she was scared or just okay with it?" Her voice wasn't dramatic. It was measured, like someone asking how long to boil an egg, but it hit Cal harder than he expected. He looked at his daughter, really looked, and saw how much she looked like Eva around the eyes. "She was strong," he said quietly. "Stronger than me, anyway." June nodded, then, "I think I would know, if it was my time." He didn't ask what that meant. He knew better than to press her. Instead, he cleared the plates, ran water into the sink, and scrubbed until the meatloaf stains disappeared. June lay on the couch reading an old library book, something about animals that could live without water. Tardigrades, she told him. Tiny survivors. When the dishes were done, Cal went out back to the workshop. He didn't turn on the overhead light this time, just used a lamp with a red bulb, one of the few things left from his dad's fishing gear. He didn't bring a plan, no blueprint, no measurements. He just started working. The wood was old cedar, rescued from the rafters of the collapsed shed out back. Rough around the edges, but not rotten. Still good. He sawed slowly, more for rhythm than speed. The blade made a soft sound each time it cleared the grain. A gentle hiss. He didn't know what he was building yet. Not a box for storing tools, not a frame for a picture. Something smaller. Something that fit between 2 hands. He cut 4 sides, then a base, smoothed each corner with a hand plane until they lined up without force. A balk, that much was clear, but for what? He wasn't sure. Maybe for June. Maybe not. Maybe for whatever he was still carrying that he hadn't named yet. A breeze slipped through the cracked window, lifting a curl of sawdust from the bench. It danced for a second, then settled. Cal sat back, wiped his hands on a rag, stared at the bog unfinished without a lid. He didn't need a lid. Some things were meant to stay open. Behind him, the door creaked. June stepped in, bare feet quiet on the concrete. "Is it another bed?" she asked. He shook his head. "Then what's it for?" He paused, then smiled just a little. "Whatever needs keeping," he said. She leaned over, traced the edge with her finger, then nodded, satisfied. "I like it better than the first one." "Me too," he replied. And for a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Just stood there, together, in a room full of unfinished things. It was the wind that woke her, not loud, just different. June sat up in bed, blinking at the shape of the moon filtered through the window blinds. The night was warm, but the wind had a dry edge to it, like paper turning itself. She got up quietly, slipped her bare feet into worn sneakers, stepped past her father's room without making a sound. Outside, the desert hummed the way it always did at night. Crickets, wind through dry brush, distant highway hush. Then she saw her. A figure, sitting on the ground just outside the workshop, knees pulled to her chest, arms wrapped around something small and square in her lap. The porch light didn't reach that far, but the moon did. The woman didn't move, didn't rock or fidget or look around. She was still. So still it scared June more than if the woman had been crying or shouting. She backed up a few steps, then turned and ran inside. Cal woke to his daughter whispering, "There's a lady in the yard." He blinked hard, trying to focus. "What?" "She's just sitting there, not moving. I think she's holding something." He got up, threw on a shirt, grabbed the flashlight from the shelf by the door, stepped outside into the quiet. The beam of the flashlight landed on her. A woman in her late 30s, maybe, wearing a coat too heavy for spring, sleeves too long. Her hair was tied back but messily. Her face hollow, drawn, eyes blank. In her lap, a tin box, the kind that once held cookies, now dented and scratched. She didn't flinch at the light, didn't look away. Cal approached slowly. "Ma'am, you okay?" She didn't respond. He crouched a few feet away, lowered the flashlight. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, a single tiny motion, no more. "You need help?" No answer. Then he noticed. The coat she wore was patched, sewn together with mismatched thread, red, blue, yellow. Some of the stitches were crooked, others were tight and perfect, like they'd held for years. He didn't press further, not yet. "Do you want to come inside? It's warmer." She looked down at the box in her lap, then back at him, still no words. He nodded. "All right, no pressure." He stood, turned slightly enough to give her room to follow or not. She stood, walked, not stumbling, not slow, just like someone who wasn't sure the ground would still hold. June watched from the window, eyes wide but not afraid. She whispered to herself. She stitched herself back together. Inside the trailer, Cal gave her a cup of water and pointed toward the couch. She sat carefully, not like someone exhausted, but like someone not sure she deserved the cushion. June stood in the kitchen, hugging her sketchbook. The woman held the tin box close. It rattled softly, like there were things inside that had edges. Cal asked gently, "Can you tell me your name?" She looked at him, looked at June, then down again. He tried a different tack. "Do you know where you came from?" No answer. June walked over, cautious but calm. She pointed to the woman's coat. "You sew?" The woman looked up just a little. June smiled. "My mom used to sew too, but only buttons." Still nothing, but her hand moved. She opened the tin box slightly, just enough for Cal to see spools of thread inside. A thimble, a folded cloth, a tiny pair of gold-handled scissors. Cal didn't ask anything else that night. He handed her a blanket, left a glass of water on the table. She slept sitting up, still holding the tin. At some point after midnight, June crept out again, drew something in her sketchbook by moonlight. In the morning, Cal found the drawing on the kitchen counter. A woman, with seams along her arms and legs, not like a doll, like someone who had been taken apart and chosen to stitch herself whole again, with no pattern, no map, only thread. By morning, the woman was still there, not asleep, not fully awake, just seated on the edge of the couch, hands curled around the tin like it held the last piece of her. Cal stood in the kitchen, pouring coffee that had been reheated one too many times. He watched her, waiting for a change, any small sign of alertness or intention. Nothing. She hadn't said a word. He thought about calling the sheriff, reporting a missing person, but something in her silence made him hesitate. Not fear, not pity, just respect. Whatever she was holding inside, it didn't feel like danger, it felt like fracture. June came out of her room, hair still messy, wearing a mismatched pair of socks and dragging her backpack behind her like a sleepy turtle. She looked at the woman, then at her dad. "You're not calling anybody, are you?" It wasn't a question. "No," Cal said. June walked up to the couch, sat down cross-legged on the floor right in front of her. "Do you have a name?" The woman blinked, just once. June glanced at the tin box. "Do you sew stuff?" The woman looked at her, briefly, then nodded so slightly it could have been missed if you weren't looking. June smiled. "Cool. Mom used to sew buttons, but they fell off again a lot." She reached for her backpack, unzipped the front pocket, and pulled out a sock with a hole in the heel. She held it out. The woman didn't take it, not right away. Then, with careful hands, she opened the tin, pulled out a needle and a small spool of green thread. She threaded the needle in one try. June whispered, "Nice." The woman began stitching, slow, precise. Her fingers knew what her mouth had forgotten. Cal sat nearby, sipping his coffee in silence, watching the scene like he was afraid it might vanish if he moved too much. After a few minutes, June said, "We should call you something." No response. "How about Stitch?" The woman didn't react. June shrugged. "It fits." Cal raised an eyebrow. "That's what we're going with?" "Well," June said. She didn't say no. The woman tied off the thread, bit it clean, and handed the sock back. The hole was gone. The repair was nearly invisible. June gave a satisfied nod. "You're hired," Cal chuckled. The woman's lips twitched, just barely, like a muscle remembering laughter, but not quite finding the strength. He stood. "I've got to drive the 10 o'clock pickup. You two okay here?" June gave a thumbs up. "We'll be good." Stitch didn't object. Later that morning, June set up her crayons at the kitchen table. Stitch sat at the other end, carefully sewing the torn seam of an old pillow she'd found in the corner. June didn't ask more questions, she just talked. About school, about how her teacher didn't like when kids sharpened pencils too long, about how there used to be a cat under the trailer, but now there were only lizards. Stitch never replied, but she listened, fully, quietly, like the words were something warm she hadn't held in a long time. At one point, June asked, "Are you staying?" Stitch paused in her stitching. June added, "It's okay if you don't know." That seemed to land somewhere deep. Stitch looked up, not at June, but at the wall behind her, the bare spot where a photo used to hang. The frame was still there, empty. She nodded. Not yes, not no, just, "I heard you." That evening, when Cal returned, he found the sock folded on the table and the pillow looking better than it had in years. He also found June asleep on the couch, her head on Stitch's lap, a thread of green still looped around the woman's pinky finger like she'd tied herself to something. Just enough not to drift away. He didn't say anything. Just pulled the blanket off the back of the chair, laid it over both of them, and sat down across the room. Stitch looked at him. No fear, no confusion, just acknowledgement. He nodded once. Whatever this was, it had already begun. The next few days passed like loose thread wandering, but somehow holding things together. Stitch didn't speak, not one word, but her presence settled into the trailer like she'd always been there, quietly occupying the spaces no one else had. It began with small repairs, a dish towel with a tear at the corner, a button missing from one of Cal's old flannel shirts, June's backpack strap, which had been hanging on by a safety pin for weeks. The first fixes were rough, uneven stitches, thread too tight or too loose. Her hands moved with caution, like someone relearning a skill she once mastered in another life. Cal noticed. He watched her one afternoon through the open doorway of the workshop, where Stitch sat on the back steps sewing a worn oven mitt with mismatched thread. She paused often, as if her fingers were asking questions her mind couldn't yet answer. But by the third day, something shifted. Her stitches grew cleaner, more confident. The pillow she repaired earlier now had a matching one, both trimmed with tiny crosshatch patterns done in golden thread. The seam on Cal's flannel shirt was so seamless he almost forgot it had ever torn. Cal didn't comment much. He just started leaving broken things on the table. A sock with a hole, a towel unraveling at the hem. One by one, she picked them up, never asking, never refusing. June, meanwhile, treated her like a new roommate. She drew pictures of stitch sewing, named all her spools of thread, and made up quiet stories about them. "This one's name is Fern," June whispered, pointing to a spool of deep green. "She's shy but smart." Stitch looked at the spool, then at June, then smiled just barely. One afternoon, June pulled a small denim jacket from her closet. It used to be Eva's. She had tried it on once before, but it hung heavy on her, like a memory she couldn't wear just yet. She brought it to Stitch, holding it out like an offering. "This was my mom's," she said. "Can you fix the elbow?" Stitch took the jacket with both hands, touched the fabric gently like it was fragile or sacred. She turned it over, examining the worn-out elbow. Her eyes scanned the fray, but something in her posture changed. She froze, not in fear, but like a song had started playing in her head, and she couldn't quite remember the words. She stood and walked outside, jacket still in hand. Sat on the porch steps, same as she had the night she arrived. Cal watched through the kitchen window, arms folded. He didn't follow. Instead, he opened the drawer where they kept receipts and warranties. Pulled out an old photo, the only one left of Eva wearing that jacket. She was leaning against a tree, laughing at something off camera. June still a baby in her arms. He looked at the photo, then at Stitch. She had the jacket folded in her lap now, unmoving. That evening, Cal grilled 2 sandwiches while June practiced piano on her keyboard, 4 keys permanently stuck from a spilled juice box 2 years back. Stitch returned inside, placed the jacket carefully on the table. The elbow was patched with a star-shaped piece of denim, sewn with silver thread in a spiral pattern that shimmered under the kitchen light. June gasped. "It's like a galaxy." Stitch blinked as if surprised by her own work. Cal handed her a plate. She didn't take it. "Are you hungry?" he asked. Still no answer, but her hands trembled just slightly. He set the plate down beside her. Didn't push. Later that night, when June had gone to bed, Cal found Stitch sitting at the table alone, her tin box open in front of her. He sat across from her, waited a moment. "You remember anything?" Her eyes flicked up, then down again. He pointed at the thread. "Your hands do." She looked at him for a long, still moment. Then she picked up the silver spool, held it in her palm, tapped her chest lightly, then shook her head. "Not yet, not enough." Cal didn't press. He leaned back in his chair, letting the silence stretch. Sometimes grief was like thread frayed, tangled, impossible to follow. But sometimes, if you sat with it long enough, it led you back. He looked at the patch on the jacket again. A galaxy on the elbow of something once broken. Maybe memory wasn't something you had to find all at once. Maybe it returned stitch by stitch. The next morning brought wind. Dry and sharp, it blew dust across the gravel lot behind the trailer, rattled the workshop's half-broken window, and sent paper scraps fluttering like birds without wings. Cal was fixing the latch on the gate when he saw Stitch sitting alone by the porch, staring at her open tin. She wasn't sewing, just running her thumb along the edge of a thimble over and over again, as if trying to unlock a memory hidden in the metal. June came out with a juice box and sat beside her, humming a song with no tune. She didn't speak, neither did Stitch, but they sat that way for 10 minutes like they'd done it 100 times before. Cal wiped his hands, went back inside, and returned with a small whiteboard, a marker clipped to its side. He knelt down beside Stitch, held it out, not too close, not too far. "You don't have to talk," he said softly, "but maybe there's something you want us to know." Stitch didn't move at first. Her eyes flicked from the marker to the board, then back to Cal. No pressure, No urgency, just space. Finally, she reached out, her fingers wrapped around the marker like it was heavier than it looked. She uncapped it, held it poised over the board, then paused. She didn't write a name. Instead, with slow, careful motion, she drew a single circle, imperfect, a little lopsided. Then across the middle she drew one line, then a second, crossing it, like an X inside the circle, but not quite centered. Not aggressive, more like a wound. She capped the marker, handed it back. Cal studied the symbol. "You don't remember words?" he asked. She shrugged, a small movement. "Do you know what this means?" She looked at the board, then pressed her palm over her heart. Cal's voice dropped. "That it's from here?" She nodded. June leaned in. "Is it a place?" Stitch didn't answer. Cal tried again. "Or a feeling?" Still no reply. The wind kicked up again, and the marker rolled off the board onto the ground. Stitch reached down, picked it up, held it in her hand for a second longer than needed. Cal stood and set the board gently on the porch railing. "All right," he said. "We'll call it what it is, for now." Later that day, while June was at school, Cal found himself glancing at the whiteboard more than once. The symbol lingered in his mind. Something about it tugged a strange kind of déjà vu. He thought of things he'd seen in the mortuary, symbols families carved into urns, logos on old army boxes, tribal brands on ranch gates. But this didn't match any of them. He tried searching online, typing variations into image search. Circle with cross, X in circle, symbol for broken memory. Nothing felt right. He closed the laptop and stared out the window instead. Stitch was in the yard again, fixing the hem of a curtain that had come loose from the trailer door. She worked without hurry, without fear of wasting time, as if time was no longer measured in hours or days, only in the number of things she could mend. That night over dinner, June pointed to the whiteboard still propped outside. "We should hang it up," she said. Cal raised an eyebrow. "Why?" June shrugged. "It's hers, even if she doesn't say it." Stitch, seated at the table with a spoon of soup paused mid-air, looked up, met Cal's eyes. For once, didn't look away. He nodded slowly. "We'll keep it," he said, "for as long as she stays." No promises, no assumptions, just a quiet agreement. Outside, the wind had finally died down. The night came gently, and with it a stillness that didn't feel empty. Later, when everyone was asleep, Stitch rose from the couch. She stepped outside barefoot, stood beside the whiteboard, and ran her fingers once across the symbol she'd drawn. Then touched her heart again, and walked back inside. It happened on a Tuesday. June had been racing a classmate during recess, gravel underfoot. No adults watching close enough, and tripped hard near the edge of the yard. Her hands broke the fall, but her elbow caught the corner of a low wooden bench. It wasn't serious, just a scrape, pink and shallow, but the sleeve of her favorite shirt tore clean down the seam. She didn't cry. June didn't cry much these days. One of the aides patched her up with a Band-Aid and a bottle of store-brand antiseptic. She kept her head high the whole time, even when the sting made her blink faster than normal. By the time Cal picked her up in the black van, she'd tucked the whole thing away like a folded piece of paper. That evening, she laid the torn shirt on the kitchen table. Not dramatically, not demanding, just placing it there, like a quiet offering. Stitch saw it, paused mid-motion, then reached for her tin box. June sat on the floor nearby, humming softly as she doodled on a torn page from an old phone book. She didn't say much, just, "It's okay if you can't fix it." But Stitch didn't answer. She picked up the shirt carefully, turned it over in her hands, then threaded her needle with a sky-blue spool June had started calling marble. The first few stitches were steady. Then something shifted. Her fingers trembled, just slightly. The needle wavered near the fabric, hovered a second too long. She paused, closed her eyes. When she opened them, her breath came shorter. Her hands resumed, slower now, careful to hide the shake, but the stitch line was less even than usual. The tension in the thread changed, pulled tighter at one edge. June noticed. She tilted her head. "You okay?" Stitch didn't look up, but the thread snapped, too tight. She winced, not from the break, but from something deeper, something inside that the needle had grazed without touching. Cal, washing dishes in the sink, turned slightly. "Everything all right?" Still no answer. But Stitch sat back, hands in her lap, needle dangling. She stared at the torn sleeve as if it had asked her a question she couldn't answer. June stood, walked over, took her hand lightly, like testing if it was safe to touch. "I've had that shirt forever," she whispered. "Mom gave it to me for my first day of school. It was too big then, but now it fits." Stitch looked at her, really looked. Her eyes flicked down to June's bandaged elbow. A dot of dried blood peeked out from under the gauze. She reached out slowly and touched the edge of the sleeve, not to continue sewing, but just to hold it. Then her lips moved, not a word, not yet, but something shaped the space between them. June nodded. "I know." Later that night, when June had gone to bed, Cal found the shirt on the back of the couch. The tear was fixed not perfectly, but lovingly. The new thread wasn't blue anymore, it was red. A color they hadn't seen Stitch use before. He picked it up, ran his thumb across the seam. The stitches were slightly uneven. The tension varied. It wasn't her best work, but it was the most human. Stitch sat alone on the porch, her tin closed for once, hands folded on top like she didn't want them to do anything else that night. Cal sat beside her. Neither spoke. In the distance, a lone coyote howled, thin, brief, more question than threat. Cal looked at Stitch. "You felt something," he said softly. She didn't nod, didn't move, but one of her hands let go of the tin, just enough to shake. And in that small, silent movement, Cal understood. Memory might still be a locked room, but feeling? Feeling had just found the key. It started with a cough, not June's, not Cal's, Stitch. A shallow, dry rasp that came suddenly while she was threading a needle, and again later that night when she tried to drink water but paused to catch her breath. Cal didn't panic, not outwardly. But the next morning he told June he'd drop her at school early. Then, without asking, he gestured for Stitch to follow him into the van. She didn't resist. She didn't ask why. She just came. The clinic was small, one room, 3 chairs, and an old vending machine that hadn't worked since the Obama years. The air smelled faintly of hand sanitizer and the lemons that only existed in cleaning product labels. Cal gave his name to the nurse. "She doesn't talk," he added, almost apologetic. The nurse nodded without surprise. "Lot of folks don't." They were told to wait, 20 minutes, maybe more. Stitch sat beside Cal in the second chair, hands on her lap, legs together as if she were trying to take up less space than a shadow. The TV in the corner played a muted soap opera. Cal tried to watch it, but found himself glancing sideways at her instead. She didn't cough again, just stared at the bulletin board across the room. One of those cork boards covered in pushpins and community notices. Lost dogs, AA meetings, babysitter needed, and then she stopped blinking. Cal followed her gaze. At the center of the board, half covered by a flyer for a garage sale, was a small, wrinkled photocopy. "Fatal collision on Route 47, 4 dead, 1 unidentified survivor." There was a date. Almost a year ago, a map of the scene, a blurry photo of first responders, no names, just that headline. Stitch stood, not suddenly, not violently, but with the quiet, electric force of someone trying not to drown in air. She walked across the room, not toward the desk, toward the board. Cal stood too. "Hey!" he said gently. "It's all right, let's just sit." She didn't hear him, or didn't want to. Her fingers touched the edge of the paper, slowly, like recognizing something not with her eyes, but through her skin. Then her breathing changed. Shallow. Fast. She backed away, not from the board, but from whatever her mind had just opened. Cal stepped in front of her, steady hands raised. "Look at me," he said. "You're safe." Her eyes were glassy, distant, but she blinked. Once, then again. Her knees buckled slightly. Cal caught her elbow. She didn't fall, but she let him guide her back to the chair. The nurse peeked through the door. "Everything okay?" Cal gave her a tight nod. "Yeah, just give us a minute." They never saw the doctor. Cal told the nurse they'd reschedule. Stitch sat silent the whole ride home, eyes fixed out the window. Fingers locked around the fabric of her jeans. Cal didn't speak either. The van was heavy with the kind of silence that asked not to be interrupted. When they got home, Stitch walked straight to the porch and sat in the sun, tin box unopened beside her. Cal stood in the kitchen, trying to make sense of what he'd seen. That flyer, that look, that reaction. He opened the drawer again, the one with all the old paperwork, and pulled out the article he'd printed months ago. The same accident, the same description. Eva had died on that road. June had been at a friend's house that night. Cal was working a night shift at the funeral home. He scanned the article again. 4 dead. 1 unidentified woman found near the wreck, unconscious, no ID. Transferred out of county jurisdiction. No follow-up, no name, no face, but a date, a place, a thread. That evening, Stitch finally moved. She opened the tin and took out one thing, a square of cloth, torn at the edges, smudged with what looked like soot. She unfolded it, held it to her face, then lowered it again. Cal approached, sat beside her. "Was it you?" he asked quietly. She didn't answer. Didn't have to. The way her hands clutched that cloth told him everything. She didn't know who she was. But something inside her remembered the moment everything changed. And now, it was trying to find its way back. One flash, one fragment, one breath at a time. The trailer was dark except for the glow of Cal's desk lamp. June was asleep, curled into her usual corner of the couch, one arm around the patched-up jacket. Stitch lay on the floor nearby, a pillow under her head, eyes closed but clearly not resting. Cal sat at the small table, fingers running over the creases of the article he'd read a dozen times. Fatal collision on Route 47. 4 dead, 1 unidentified survivor. It was all too clean, too short, no names released. No photos aside from a grainy overhead shot of the wreckage, barely enough to make out the shape of the burned van. Eva had been driving back from Santa Rosa that night. Cal knew the route well, narrow shoulder, loose gravel, no guardrails in some parts. The other driver had crossed the line, a head-on crash. Eva died at the scene, or so they'd said. But the report he held now, obtained weeks after the accident, filed by a local EMT, told a quieter story. One detail, easy to miss unless you were desperate enough to read between the lines. 1 adult female was recovered alive, but unconscious. No ID on her person. Taken to Albuquerque Medical for trauma care, patient unresponsive at time of transfer. No name, no follow-up. Just a note in the margin. Status unknown. Case transferred out of county jurisdiction. Cal leaned back, stared at the ceiling. Transferred. Out of jurisdiction. Forgotten. He clicked open his old laptop, screen dim and cracked at one corner. Searched medical intake records from that night, the hospital logs from surrounding counties. Most required logins, some didn't. A list of trauma patients came up coded by intake number, initials, date of arrival. One caught his eye. F.A., adult female, approximate age 30 to 40, admitted unconscious, no family contact. He whispered it aloud. F.A. Eva's full name had been Eva Florence Bishop. Could F.A. be something else entirely? Of course. But could it not? Cal zoomed in on the intake time. 03:12 a.m. Roughly 90 minutes after the crash report had been filed. He stared at the screen, jaw set. Something deep in his chest stirred, not hope exactly. More like the echo of a door creaking open that had been locked too long. Outside, wind brushed against the trailer, lifting the whiteboard from where it leaned on the porch railing. It didn't fall, but it tilted slightly, the X inside the circle catching moonlight through the window. Cal stood, walked to the couch, and picked up the folded cloth Stitch had carried back from the clinic. He brought it under the lamp, faint stitching on one corner. Not words, not letters. Just two crossing threads, pale gray, barely visible unless you tilted the fabric just right. The same symbol. His hand shook just a little. He turned to look at Stitch. She was lying still, breathing evenly, but her hand twitched once open, then close-like, reaching for something in a dream she couldn't name. Cal sat back down, opened a new tab, typed, "How to locate unidentified patients in long-term care." He didn't know what he'd do if it were true. Didn't know what it would mean if it weren't. All he knew was that Stitch had come from somewhere. And maybe, just maybe, she hadn't been sent. Maybe she had survived. And maybe she was still stitching herself back to the life that was once torn from her. Thread by thread. And now he had to decide. Would he pull that thread, or let her stay whole in silence? It was Saturday, the kind of dry, slow-moving day when everything seemed to pause, even the dust in the air. Cal had gone into town for a parts run. The old workshop door kept sticking again, and he said he needed a longer hinge. But June knew when her dad needed space, when his silence wasn't about tools. That left her and Stitch alone at the trailer. The tin box was open on the table, thread spools arranged like a strange little rainbow. Navy, yellow, gray, rust, silver. June sat across from her, elbows on the table, turning a small cloth doll in her hands. She'd made it from scraps, an old pillowcase for the body, brown thread for hair, a button missing from Cal's jacket for one eye. The other eye she'd left blank, not forgotten, just waiting. "I want her to have a story," June said softly. Stitch looked up from the spool she was organizing. "I mean," June went on, "not just a name, like a real story, where she came from, what she lost." She held the doll upright. "But I can't make one up. Not a real one. Not the kind you feel in your stomach." Stitch tilted her head, watched the doll, said nothing. June placed the doll gently in front of her. "Maybe you know." Stitch didn't move, just stared. The clock on the wall clicked. 1 second, 2. Then slowly Stitch picked up the silver thread. June's breath caught. She hadn't seen Stitch use silver in days, since the jacket, since the spiral on the elbow that shimmered like stars. Stitch threaded the needle. Her hands, steady now, moved with quiet rhythm. She turned the doll over, began to stitch something into the fabric along its back. No pattern, no letters, just loops, curves, a design that didn't copy anything yet felt like it came from someplace very, very old. June leaned in. "What does it mean?" No answer. Stitch stitched. The thread glinted each time the needle lifted, like light finding metal beneath dirt. It wasn't fast, but it was sure. After a while, June whispered, Do you remember things, like really remember? Or just pieces? Stitch froze just for a moment, her needle hovering midair. June softened her voice. You don't have to tell me. I hope you're not scared of remembering. Stitch looked at her, eyes darker today, tired around the edges. Then she shook her head. Not like no, more like, I'm not ready. When Cal returned, the doll sat upright on the kitchen counter. On its back, a stitched design in silver thread, 2 wide loops crossing near the base of the spine, like wings folding in or roots curling downward. He picked it up, ran his thumb over the thread, said nothing. June stood nearby. She didn't say what it meant. Cal nodded. She doesn't have to. That night, when June went to bed, she placed the doll under her pillow. Not to wish for dreams, just so it wouldn't sleep alone. Later, long after the trailer had gone quiet, Stitch stood on the porch with the tin box open in her hands. She took out the silver spool, let it hang from her fingers, then, without stitching, she wound a bit of it around her wrist, not tight, just enough to feel it there. Then she whispered something. Too soft for anyone to hear, too soft even for herself. But in that whisper, not fear, not sorrow, only a thread of longing, silver and unfinished. The air was cooler that night. A breeze moved through the dry grass behind the trailer, carrying the scent of rain that hadn't come. Cal sat on the porch, a cup of coffee gone cold in his hands. He wasn't drinking it, just holding it like something warm to remind him he was still here. Stitch sat a few steps away, mending a curtain she'd taken down earlier that morning. She worked by porch light now, the needle glinting as it moved in and out of the cloth, steady and smooth. Cal hadn't said much all day. He was thinking about the whiteboard, the silver thread, the symbol, and about Eva. Did June ever tell you about her mom? He asked quietly. Stitch didn't look up. He continued anyway. Her name was Eva. She used to hum all the time, not loud, just under her breath, like the house was too quiet and she needed to fill it with something soft. He smiled to himself, the kind that didn't lift your face, only tugged something in your chest. She had this lullaby, Cal went on. Didn't have a name. I don't think it was from any record. She used to say her grandma sang it, and she just remembered the tune. He leaned back in the chair, the wood creaking beneath him. It didn't have an ending, he added after a pause. She'd hum the same line over and over again. Stop just before you expected it to finish. He looked at Stitch now. She said it was safer that way, that if you never sang the last note, it couldn't disappear. Stitch's hands slowed, just a little. Her needle paused above the fabric, hovered there. Then she resumed stitching, but her rhythm had changed, subtle, like a breath catching before it returns to normal. Cal noticed. He took another breath. She made things feel lighter than they were, even when she was sick, even when we both knew she might not come home. His voice lowered like the porch itself might be listening. She drove out to Santa Rosa to visit her sister. Just a day trip. I told her the weather was turning, but she hated being told what to do. He smiled again, bitter at the corners. She was always free like that. Even when she was angry, even when she cried, there was still this light in her, like you couldn't ever quite break her. A long silence followed. Nothing but the creak of the porch rail and the wind shifting. Then, a soft sound. Not a word, not a whisper. Just a breath that caught in Stitch's throat. Her hands stopped completely. She looked down at the fabric, one stitch undone, needle threaded, frozen. Cal didn't move, didn't speak, just watched. Stitch's eyes began to shift, darting not in panic, but like searching a room in the dark. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Then her hand lifted, pressed to her chest just once, not like pain, like recognition, a flicker, a trace. Cal leaned forward. Was it the song? He asked. Do you remember it? Stitch closed her eyes and nodded, not yes, not certainty, just, I've heard it before. That night, she didn't sew. She sat by the window, unspooling the silver thread into a small tangled pile in her lap. Not to waste it, not to fix anything, just to feel it. Her fingers moved through it slowly, like trying to remember how something felt long before it broke. Cal stayed nearby, pretending to read an old manual for the van, but his eyes weren't on the page. He kept glancing toward her, and at one point she began to hum, very soft, very low. No melody anyone would recognize, not a tune you'd whistle or play. But Cal knew. It was the line Eva never finished, the one that never had a last note. And now it was back, still unfinished, still here. The rain had come and gone overnight, just a passing shower, but in Dry Ridge, even a few minutes of water felt like something rare, a kind of quiet blessing. The dust on the windows turned to streaks. The workshop roof leaked again, dripping into the old paint can Cal kept in the corner for exactly that reason. By morning, the air was different, cooler. The ground smelled like wet rock and faded grass. Stitch sat at the table, a folded handkerchief in front of her. Cal didn't know where it had come from. Maybe something from the donation bin at the clinic, or maybe June's drawer. It didn't matter. She held it like it mattered. The fabric was pale blue, faded, thin from age but clean. She touched it the way you touch something fragile, not because it might break, but because it had already survived too much to be treated roughly now. She picked up a needle, chose a gray-silver thread, not the bright one, but the soft tone that almost disappeared in certain light. She began to sew, not a design, not a shape. Words, small, steady, careful. Cal noticed after a while. He didn't interrupt. He just leaned in the doorframe of the kitchen, holding a coffee mug he hadn't sipped in 10 minutes. He watched her loop the letters one after the other. Her eyes fixed, breath even, hands more certain than they'd ever been. It wasn't embroidery for beauty, it was something else, like a declaration or a message from a deeper place. June came in from outside, cheeks pink from the wind. She paused when she saw the cloth in Stitch's lap, walked over slowly. She didn't ask, she just read, then whispered aloud like the words weren't real until spoken. Still here. Stitch looked up. For a second, her face changed just slightly. Her lips parted. Her hands stopped moving. She met June's gaze and held it. Cal felt it too. That phrase, not loud, not dramatic, just final in a quiet human way. Still here, not gone, not whole, not lost, just here. Later, June folded the handkerchief carefully and placed it in the center drawer of the table, next to the whiteboard and the doll with silver stitching. They were building a kind of archive now, not of facts, but of proof. Proof that someone unnamed had existed, had stayed, had left pieces behind that could be gathered gently. That evening, as the sky turned the color of cooled ash, Cal sat on the porch and watched Stitch trim the last edge of loose thread from the cloth. She didn't need to explain. He didn't need her to. The storm had passed. The words remained. Still here. It was Sunday morning. No school, no rush, just a stillness in the air that Cal couldn't ignore. He'd been up since dawn, sitting in the workshop, staring at the same piece of paper for nearly an hour before finally folding it twice and sliding it into his jacket pocket. He didn't want to bring it out, but he couldn't keep it hidden anymore. Stitch was sitting at the kitchen table, sewing the frayed edge of an old dish towel June had used to clean up her paint set. Her hair was tied back with one of June's worn shoelaces, and the silver thread sat untouched by her side. Cal entered without a word. He stood beside her, hands in his jacket pockets, eyes on the table. Then he spoke. "I need to show you something." She looked up, not with fear, not with curiosity, just patience, as if she already knew something was coming. He pulled out the folded paper, unfolded it carefully, laid it flat on the table between them. It was a printout from the County Accident Report Archive. Clean text on white paper. No images, no emotions, just facts. Vehicle 2009. White passenger van, Route 47, mile marker 82. Fatalities 4, survivors 1. Female, approx, age 30, chapter 40, unidentified. Stitch stared at it. He pointed to the last line. "That's you," he said, not as a question. Not anymore. She didn't flinch, didn't shake her head, didn't reach for the paper, but her eyes locked on the line, those 6 words, like a thread that had never been tied off. Cal sat across from her. "It was Eva's van, the same night, same crash. I thought everyone in that car was gone." He swallowed hard. "But then you showed up, and the dates match, and no one ever came to claim the survivor." Stitch looked at him now, really looked, and in her expression something shifted just a little, like a door creaking open in an abandoned house. She reached out. Her fingers brushed the edge of the paper, not to take it, just to touch. Cal waited. Then he pointed again, this time not at the survivor line, but at the blank space next to it, where a name should have been. A name that never came. "You've been carrying something ever since, and maybe this is where it started." He paused. "But I need to know one thing, and I'll never ask again." She held still. He leaned forward. "Did you know her?" His voice lowered. "Eva." Stitch blinked slowly. Her hand pulled back. She didn't answer. Instead, she stood up slowly, carefully, and walked to the drawer. The one where June had placed the stitched handkerchief. The one that read, "Still here." She unfolded it, held it in both hands, then turned to face him, and pressed it to her chest, not like a statement, like a confession. The room was quiet. The only sound was the wind brushing past the window, soft and uncertain. Cal sat back in his chair, exhaled through his nose. "Okay," he said after a moment. "That's enough." He stood up, walked to the counter, started the kettle without thinking. Stitch didn't move, still holding the cloth. June came in a moment later, sleepy-eyed, dragging her sketchbook behind her. She looked at the paper still on the table. "What's that?" Cal folded it once more. "Something from before," he said. June didn't press, but she looked at Stitch, who stood so still she could have been made of stone. Then she reached out and took her hand. "It's okay," she whispered. "You don't have to remember all of it, just the part that still matters." That night, the paper stayed folded in Cal's coat pocket. He didn't need it on the table anymore, because the truth wasn't in the report. It was in the way Stitch pressed those 2 stitched words to her chest and trembled. That night, Stitch didn't sleep. She sat by the kitchen window, knees drawn up to her chest. The tin box unopened on the floor beside her. Outside, the wind picked up again. Not fierce, just restless. Like something circling the trailer that didn't want to come in, only wanted her to remember it. She had the handkerchief in her hands, still here. Now, faint from folding and touch, she rubbed the thread between her fingers over and over until it began to fray. When Cal passed through the hallway near midnight to refill June's humidifier, he saw her. He stopped. She didn't look up. She didn't blink. He didn't speak. Some storms you didn't talk people through. You just stood nearby in case they came out the other side. By morning, Stitch hadn't moved. Her eyes were open but far away, unfocused, glassy. She didn't respond to June calling her name. Didn't eat. Didn't pick up her needle. She just sat with her arms around her knees like a child lost in a too big house. June didn't cry. Not this time. Instead, she disappeared into her room and came back with the doll. The one with the mismatched button eye and silver spiral stitched across its back. She placed it gently in Stitch's lap. "I was saving this for when you were ready," she said. Stitch didn't move. June added more quietly, "But maybe ready's not real. Maybe it just means you don't run." Then she stepped away. She didn't expect an answer. Didn't expect anything, really. She just walked to the couch and curled up with a blanket, watching the rain start again outside. Soft this time, as if the sky didn't want to scare anyone. An hour passed, maybe more. Then something shifted, barely audible. The tiniest inhale, a tremor in the cloth. Stitch's hands rose slow, uncertain. She touched the doll's spine. Her thumb ran over the silver thread once. Then again. Her eyes blinked, twice, and something inside her seemed to catch. Not break. Catch. Like a breath finding its way back after forgetting how to move through a body. She held the doll to her chest, pressed her cheek against its soft, uneven head, and for the first time since she'd arrived, Stitch cried. Cal stood at the kitchen door, watching in silence. He didn't step in, didn't try to stop it. He just let it happen. Some griefs weren't meant to be stitched. They had to be felt. All the way through. Cal hadn't dreamed of Eva in months. Not really. There had been flickers, shadows behind curtains, laughter caught in the corners of empty rooms. Once, her perfume in the air when no windows were open. But this dream was different. He was back in the field behind their old trailer, the first one they ever lived in, years before June was born. The grass was taller than it should have been, the sky all bruised purples and low thunder. Eva was there, barefoot, in that faded gray sweatshirt she always wore when she was cold but didn't want to say so. Her hair was windblown, her eyes clear. She didn't smile, she just looked at him. Cal tried to speak, his throat didn't move. Then she did. "You think it's about memory?" she said, voice steady. "But it's not." He blinked. Eva stepped forward, not close, just enough that her words didn't have to fight the wind. "It's about permission," she said. "You're waiting for someone to give it to you." He shook his head, barely. "I'm not asking you to let go," she said. "I'm telling you the living are the only ones who get to choose how to keep going." Cal opened his mouth. It was dry, heavy. "She's not me," Eva said gently. "She never was." The thunder behind her stopped. The field stilled. Cal felt the weight of it. Not grief, but a kind of release. A loosening in his chest he hadn't allowed since the funeral, since the crash, since the silence that followed. "She's still here," he whispered. Eva nodded once. "So are you," she said, and then she was gone. He woke up before dawn. The trailer was silent save for the creak of the walls settling in the cold. Cal sat on the edge of his bed, eyes adjusting to the dim. There was no perfume, no voice, but his hands were steady. He stood, stepped quietly into the hallway. In the living room, Stitch was asleep sitting up, the patched doll clutched to her chest. Her cheek still damp, but her breathing was calm now. The kind of calm that only comes after something's broken open and been allowed to stay that way. Cal didn't wake her. He didn't need to. He simply placed a fresh cup of water on the table beside her. Then he sat nearby, hands clasped. He whispered, mostly to himself, "Still here." And for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like he was saying it just about her. The old wooden bridge behind the trailer had collapsed last spring. Nothing dramatic, just years of rot finally giving way. A few boards had fallen into the dry creek bed, and Cal had pulled the rest up for safety. What remained was a gap between two banks, weeds, stone, and silence. They hadn't used it in months. But that morning, after breakfast, Cal stood out back with a toolbox in one hand and a length of cedar planks in the other. He didn't announce what he was doing. He just walked down the slope and began clearing the brush. June came out barefoot, carrying the patched-up doll by one arm. She watched him for a moment from the top of the hill, then turned and called inside the trailer. "Hey," she said. "We're building something. Want to help?" No name, no explanation, just an invitation. Within the hour, Stitch was there too. Kneeling beside June, pulling weeds, sorting the old nails from the usable ones, brushing dirt off the stones with the edge of her sleeve. Cal measured the distance across the bank and drove the first support post in by hand, then motioned for Stitch to hold the beam steady. She didn't hesitate. Her hands were quick, steady now. Not like the first days, not unsure. They didn't speak much, only the sounds of hammering, wood scraping, and birds overhead. June painted one end of the new railing with the blue chalk she usually saved for sidewalks. She added stars, circles, a lopsided heart. Then, without looking up, she said, "I think we should call it the Bridge for the Nameless." Cal glanced over. "That's so?" June nodded. "It's for people who don't know where they belong yet." She looked at Stitch, who paused mid-sanding and met her gaze. "But they're trying." By midday, half the bridge was laid, old beams on one side, new cedar planks on the other. It didn't look perfect. Some of the boards didn't match. The grain ran in different directions, but it held and it crossed. Stitch stood in the center for a long time, looking down at the dry creek bed below. Wind passed through her hair. She didn't move. Then she turned, walked back across, one step at a time. June whispered, as if to herself, "Now nobody has to stay stuck." That night, Cal stood on the porch as dusk fell. The bridge was visible from the back window, faint in the fading light, but clearly there. Solid, crossable. He thought about how many things in his life had been left half-built, how many conversations had started and stopped, how many silences had stretched too long, hoping to become answers. Inside, Stitch sat by the window with a small square of fabric in her lap. She wasn't mending it. She was just holding it, running her fingers over the blank space like she was waiting for something to come. A word, a name, a beginning. June lay asleep nearby, doll tucked beside her, one arm over her head like a child mid-dream. Cal stepped inside. Stitch looked up. He didn't speak, just nodded once toward the window. Toward the bridge. She nodded back. Nothing more needed to be said. Sometimes healing didn't arrive like a miracle. It came as lumber and thread, as sweat on your back, as a child painting stars where no one had asked her to, and a name that hadn't been found yet but no longer needed to be chased. It was near sunset when it happened. The air was golden, thick with the smell of cedar and warmed earth. Cal stood behind the trailer, brushing sawdust from his jeans when he heard the screen door creak and shut behind him. Stitch stepped out, barefoot, hair tied back with a strip of the same cloth she'd embroidered days earlier. She stood at the edge of the porch, watching June crouch near the bridge, chalking stars onto the handrail again. Cal turned slightly, waiting for her to speak, though not expecting it. He'd stopped expecting by now. Hope had turned into something quieter, softer. Then she did. Not loud, not even clear at first, just a whisper. "Sleep, little shadow." Cal froze. He didn't look at her right away. He looked at the ground, then the sky, anything but her face, because something in him was already breaking open. She took another breath, voice barely more than air. "I will follow where you go." He turned now, met her eyes. They were wet, wide, but steady. "That song," he said. Stitch nodded. "I heard it before," she said, each word careful, as if her tongue had to feel them out first. "A woman, she held me. After the noise, after the fire." Her hands trembled. She covered me with her coat. Cal felt the earth drop beneath his feet. Not metaphor, a full-body stillness his knees wanted to give. "You remember her?" he asked, voice raw. Stitch nodded again, slower this time. "She sang that line, just once." Then after a pause, "She didn't come back." The jacket, the old green canvas one they never found at the crash site. Eva's. She had kept it in the back seat always, even in summer. For roadside naps, for sudden storms, for someone else, apparently, when the end came. Cal rubbed his face with both hands. He didn't speak for a long time. When he finally did, it was quiet. "She gave it to you." A statement, not a question. Stitch's voice was small but clearer now. "She died saving me." He nodded, not just to agree, to accept, to grieve her all over again, but differently this time. Not as someone lost, as someone who had chosen what to give away. Inside, June set the chalk down and turned just in time to see her father place a hand on Stitch's shoulder. No hug, no tears, just presence. A weight shared, not removed. She didn't interrupt. She just stood still, her doll pressed to her chest like it was part of her heartbeat now. Later that evening, Cal pulled out the tin box, the one Stitch had kept closed since the rain. He handed it to her. She opened it, hands no longer shaking. Inside, folded cloth, tangled thread, a thimble, a needle, and tucked beneath it all, something she hadn't noticed until now. A small corner of green canvas, burned at the edge, worn thin with time. She pulled it free, and this time, when she pressed it to her face, she didn't cry. She smiled, soft, sad, but real. That night, Stitch sat by the bridge alone, not to leave, just to listen. The wind moved through the trees like breath, like song, and though no one else could hear it. She began humming again, the same line, over and over, not to remember, but to finish it. The next morning was bright, not hot, not yet, but the kind of light that made shadows sharp and colors honest. Cal was out by the bridge again, tightening bolts on the last handrail before the heat set in. He worked quietly. Focus helped him think less, about what had changed, about what hadn't. Behind him, Stitch approached. He didn't need to turn. He could hear the soft rhythm of her barefoot steps on the packed earth. She carried a jar of nails in both hands, lid rattling. "Here," she said softly. Her voice was steadier now, not frequent but present. He reached to take the jar. That's when it happened. His wrench slipped from the beam, metal hit wood, bounced and dropped to the dirt below. Reflex took over. He bent to grab it too fast. His balance faltered. One knee gave. He caught himself just before the edge. But his hand landed squarely against Stitch's arm, palm to skin, and he didn't pull away, not instantly, not out of apology. He froze, but not from discomfort. It was something else. Something still. She didn't flinch. Her arm stayed where it was, warm, steady under his hand. She looked down at him, then quietly placed the jar beside his knee. "You okay?" she asked. Cal let out a short breath, half laugh, half answer. "Yeah," he said, "just old." Stitch crouched beside him, picked up the wrench, held it out. He took it, but before he turned back to the railing, his eyes flicked to her fingers. Thin, calloused now, marked with thread lines, stronger than the first time she'd picked up a needle in his kitchen. "You sew like a soldier," he said without thinking. She raised an eyebrow. "That's a compliment," he added. She smiled, the smallest one. It stayed. They finished the rail in silence, working side by side, not careful anymore, just together. Later, Cal stood on the porch, wiping sweat from his forehead with a rag. He looked at his hand, the one that had caught her arm, and for a moment, just a breath, He thought of how long it had been since touch didn't feel like a risk, since he didn't need to flinch, and maybe, just maybe, neither did she. June had been whispering all week, not secretive, just excited in the way only a child with a mission can be. She kept slipping away to her room, carrying odds and ends, a broken scarf, a jacket too short, an old oven mitt Cal thought he'd thrown out last winter. Then one afternoon, while the sun was low and golden through the windows, she called out, "Come see!" Cal was the first to follow her voice. Stitch came a second later, drying her hands on the hem of her shirt. They stepped into the living room and stopped. The far corner of the space, once stacked with Cal's toolboxes and June's puzzle boxes, had been completely transformed. A sheet dyed blue with food coloring hung like a curtain against the back wall. In front of it, a clothesline strung tight from the curtain rod to the bookshelf, holding 7 pieces of fabric, each pinned neatly with clothespins. Each one had been stitched by Stitch: the doll's patched shirt, the elbow of Cal's old flannel, the repaired dish towel, the shoulder of June's birthday dress, even the curtain tie with the mismatched green thread. Every object she'd mended in silence now hung like a story. At the foot of the display was a cardboard box flipped upside down. On it, written in marker, the Gallery of Fixing Things, by June, starring Stitch. Cal chuckled under his breath. "You made a museum in our house?" "No," June said, arms crossed proudly. "An exhibit, there's a difference." She walked over and tapped one of the patches. "This one. That's where my favorite sleeve ripped when I fell. She fixed it even though the thread didn't match." Stitch stepped forward slowly. Her eyes moved across each piece, each imperfection made whole again. Each memory held not in perfection but in care. "You stitched all these," June said, looking up at her. "But now they're not just fixed. They mean something." She opened her arms dramatically. "This is your light corner." Cal raised an eyebrow. "Light corner?" June pointed up. From a nail in the ceiling beam, she'd hung a thin strip of embroidered cloth. Something Stitch had worked on without a purpose, just a practice piece. June had folded it into a cone, and inside, she'd placed one of her battery-powered nightlights. The fabric glowed, not bright, but warm, soft orange, bleeding through the threads of silver and pale yellow. It looked like candlelight wrapped in memory. Stitch walked up to the display, touched the edge of the glowing cloth. She turned to June. "This is mine?" June nodded. "It's you. I just helped." Cal stepped beside them. "Well," he said, scratching the back of his neck, "can't say I've ever seen a finer museum of second chances." He looked at Stitch. "You've stitched this house back together." She didn't speak, but she stepped forward and adjusted one of the clothespins that had come loose. Then gently she picked up the patched doll from a shelf nearby, its silver spiral still glinting when the porch light caught it. She placed it beneath the glowing fabric right at the base of the light corner, like a centerpiece, like an offering. June whispered, "She's the start of everything." That night, the living room stayed dimmed except for the fabric light. Cal didn't turn on the overheads. He didn't need to. They sat in the quiet, surrounded by patched cloth and breathing walls, as if the trailer itself had been sewn back together from grief. And in that soft-lit gallery of small repairs, nothing felt broken anymore. Cal didn't speak much that morning. He stood at his workbench long before the sun rose, hands brushing fine sawdust from a slab of cherry wood he'd been saving. Too small for furniture, too beautiful to waste. His fingers moved carefully, tracing the lines of the grain, slow and deliberate, like he wasn't carving wood but writing something without ink. By noon, the box was taking shape. It wasn't large. A little longer than his forearm, the height of a folded shirt. He worked silently, pausing only to wipe sweat from his brow and remeasure the corners. The lid was fitted with a shallow groove so it could slide open with one thumb, snug but not tight. No hinges, no lock, just intention. Inside the trailer, Stitch sat in the corner where the cloth light still glowed. On her lap, a folded square of canvas plain, raw-edged. She had chosen the black thread first, then changed her mind. She reached into her tin box and pulled the silver one again. The same that had stitched the doll's spine and the spiral on June's sleeve. Her hands worked slowly now, not from uncertainty but reverence. She wasn't fixing anymore. She was saying something final. June brought her lemonade, set it down without interrupting. She'd seen the phrase earlier, written in pencil in the margin of Stitch's notebook. A single line, only remember who held you when you couldn't hold yourself. Later, Stitch rephrased it shorter, softer. Just don't forget who kept you alive. Even later it became the way it was meant to be, the way Stitch remembered it, the language of breath, of lullabies, of what comes after pain. By the time the sun began to dip, Cal brought the box inside. It smelled of wood oil and quiet hours. He placed it on the table beside Stitch's finished cloth. He didn't ask what she'd written. She didn't ask what it was for. Some things don't require naming to be understood. They sat across from each other. June nestled between them on a stool, her head resting against her dad's side, eyes sleepy but watching. Stitch picked up the cloth and folded it, not into a square but carefully corner to corner, edge to center. Like a note passed between two people who never got the chance to say goodbye. She placed it inside the box. Cal slid the lid closed. There was no ceremony, no announcement. But something about that sound, the soft click of wood meeting wood, felt like an answer long in the waiting, a way of saying, this belonged to pain, and now it belongs to memory. That night, Cal placed the box on the shelf near the patched doll, not hidden, not displayed, just there, a quiet reminder, a shape made not of what was lost but what was carried through. When the lights went out, Stitch stood in the soft blue of June's curtain lamp. She looked at the shelf, at the doll, at the box, then quietly to herself in the language Eva used to hum. She didn't know if it was a goodbye or a beginning. But she knew this much now. She had not vanished. She had been held, and now she would remember. The trailer was quiet when Cal woke. Too quiet. The kind that doesn't come from sleep, but from something having already passed through and left. He sat up slowly, listened. No footsteps, no kettle humming, no thread brushing fabric, no faint clearing of a throat, just wind through the cracked porch screen and June still breathing softly on the couch. He stepped out of the bedroom and saw it instantly. The table, cleared. The gallery corner still intact, but the tin box was gone. In its place on the table, the wooden box he had carved, its lid slightly open. Inside, folded with impossible neatness, was the silver-stitched cloth. Next to it, her needles, her last 3 spools of thread, and a single thimble tucked inside a spool like it was being protected. Cal didn't speak, didn't call for her. He stepped outside. The grass held no footprints, the gravel gave no sign. She hadn't taken the road, not that he could tell. She'd just gone. June stirred hours later, rubbing sleep from her eyes, blinking into the late morning light. "Is she gone?" she asked, before she even saw the box. Cal nodded once. June walked to the table, looked inside. Her hands didn't reach for the cloth, only rested on the edge. She didn't say goodbye. "No," Cal said, "but she left everything that mattered." June thought about that. Then, maybe she thought goodbye would break something. Cal exhaled. "Or maybe," he said, "goodbye already happened and we just didn't know." They didn't try to find her. Not that day, not the next. Sometimes people go not to disappear, but to return to themselves without anyone watching. And when they're ready, if they ever are, they'll bring back a new thread, one only they can carry. That evening, Cal sat with the box in his lap. He didn't close the lid, didn't tuck it away, he just held it open. The cloth read in silver thread, "Just don't forget who kept you alive." He ran a thumb along the edge, not to mourn, to remember, and to keep the light corner lit. It took Cal 3 days, not of searching, of deciding. He hadn't planned to go looking. But the sight of that wooden box sitting too still on the table each morning was like a breath he couldn't finish. And one thought kept returning, again and again, like the tide lapping at the same stretch of shore. Route 47, mile marker 82, the crash site, where they had said it ended, where maybe something had also begun. He left June with neighbors she liked, packed water, a map, and nothing else. The drive out was long and empty. Scrubland rolled by like a half-forgotten memory, brown hills, cracked pavement, silence broken only by tires humming beneath him. When he pulled onto the gravel turnout, the air shifted, still, thin. He stepped out and walked. It looked different now. Most of the scorched trees had been cut back. The grass had grown over the edge of the embankment, but he could still see the black scars on the rocks below, where the vehicle had landed. The ground still bore the story, even if no one was telling it out loud anymore. And there, at the edge of the clearing, near a weathered cross someone had staked years ago, stood Stitch. Back turned to him, hair loose, dress catching in the wind. She didn't move, didn't turn, just stood still, staring into the space where the fire had once been. Cal approached slowly. He didn't call her name, didn't say a word. He stopped a few feet away, just close enough for her to know he was there. After a long pause, she spoke. "I don't remember the impact," she said, "only the heat and her hands." Her voice didn't shake. "She pulled me out. That much I know. I wasn't meant to live, but she gave me her coat, her breath." She pointed down into the gorge. "She stayed there. I didn't." A long silence settled between them. Then Cal spoke, quiet and even. She'd have wanted it that way. Stitch nodded once. "I came to see if the ground still remembered." Cal looked out over the rocks. "And?" She finally turned to him. "It does." Her face was calm, tired, lined with sun and silence. But something had settled in her eyes, something deeper than grief. Not closure exactly, but presence. Like the fire had taken her once and she'd walked through it. And now, she had returned not to burn again, to stand. Cal walked closer. They stood side by side. Neither spoke for a while. Then Stitch said, "I wasn't ready before." He looked at her. She met his eyes. "But now I know what the thread was for." He didn't need to ask. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small bundle of cloth frayed at the edge, stained in one corner, but whole. Unfolded, stitched into the center in clean silver thread, was a single line. "If you're still alive, you can still mend." She held it out. Cal didn't take it right away. He just stared at it, then at her, then finally he nodded and took the cloth. He folded it with care, not reverence, and slipped it into his chest pocket, over his heart. They stood a while longer in silence. Not to wait, just to witness. Some ground holds more than ash. Some places burn clean, then offer something back. Not answers, not healing, but a reason to keep walking. The sun had begun to tilt westward. Longer shadows crept through the rocks and brush as Cal and Stitch stood together on the charred edge of mile marker 82. The wind had cooled, the silence had deepened, but it wasn't heavy anymore. It felt open, like breath. She turned to him. The faintest wind pushed her hair back from her face. Then she said it, quiet, plain. "If someone asked me to stay, if someone truly wanted me to..." She stopped, let it hang. Her eyes met his. I'd stay. No thunder, no music, just the raw weight of that one sentence. Cal didn't answer right away. He reached into the canvas bag slung across his shoulder, the one he'd brought not for tools, but for this. First, he pulled out the doll, the patched one with the silver spiral, the mismatched button eye, the lopsided seam June had made when she was learning to sew. Its hair was unraveling a little at the edge. He handed it to Stitch. "She sleeps with this under her pillow," he said. "Says it still holds your thread." Stitch took it with both hands, holding it gently like something both fragile and familiar. Her thumb ran over the spiral. Then Cal reached in again. He pulled out a folded piece of green fabric, soft, aged, worn at the cuffs. He held it out. Eva's jacket, the one they'd never found, now returned by a woman who'd never meant to keep it, but who had lived inside its warmth. "She'd want you to have it," Cal said. Stitch stared at it. Then, with a breath so shallow it almost wasn't there, she nodded. Not as thanks, not as farewell, but as agreement. She pulled it on. The sleeves were too long, the shoulders a little broad. But it fit in the way grief sometimes fits after enough time. Not tight, not sharp, just real. Cal sat down on a flat stone. The light warmed his back. He didn't tell her what to do, didn't ask what she needed. He just said, "June's making a new shelf in the corner. Said it's for someone who might come home." Stitch looked at him. "She knows I left?" "She knows," he said with a soft smile. "She also knows not everyone stays away forever." A pause. Then, "You don't owe us anything, but I think we might owe you something. A place, a name, the rest of your song." Stitch looked down at the doll again. The spiral shimmered faintly in the lowering sun. Then she looked at her hands, thread-worn, quiet, and finally at Cal. She asked with a voice that didn't tremble anymore, "Would it be all right if I didn't leave again?" He answered without words, just reached over and rested his hand on hers gently, solidly, like a door being opened from the inside. Later they started the drive back. No music, no rush. Only the low hum of the road beneath the tires, and the doll in her lap held like something that had finally made its way home. The light was honey-colored, the kind that stretches across late summer grass and catches in the corners of eyelashes, like the day itself is trying to hold on just a little longer. They sat on the bridge, the one they'd built together. Stitch in the middle, legs tucked beneath her, sleeves rolled up. The jacket still on her shoulders, though the air was warm. Cal on one side, leaning back on his hands, eyes half closed behind his glasses. June on the other, barefoot, swinging her legs above the dry creek bed, the patched doll resting in her lap like a quiet heartbeat. No one spoke at first. There was no need. The wood beneath them creaked softly as the sun settled lower. Leaves rustled overhead. A bird called once, distant, then went still. And then, June broke the silence. Not loudly, not dramatically, just 3 words said like a small truth. "Here, now, enough." Cal looked over, one eyebrow raised. "What's that?" June shrugged, grinning like she'd known something before anyone else did. "It's what I'd write," she said. "If this was the last page of a story." She glanced at Stitch. "Because we're here. Because now is real, and because maybe that's enough." Stitch smiled. Not the careful one, not the quiet one, but a full, open smile that lifted her whole face. She didn't answer aloud, just nodded. Once, like closing a loop. Cal leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Sounds about right," he said. His voice was steady, not hiding, not aching, just full. The sun dropped lower, throwing long shadows across the bridge. In the fading light, the spiral on the doll's back shimmered. The same thread that had stitched wounds, shirts, curtains, and hearts back together. Not perfectly, not cleanly, but honestly. Stitch reached over and rested her hand on the railing June had painted stars on. The paint was chipped in places now, faded, but still there, like everything that had carried them to this moment. June leaned her head against Stitch's shoulder, and Cal didn't look away, didn't rush them, didn't try to sum anything up. The three of them sat there as the light thinned, not waiting for anything, not chasing what came next, just here, now, enough.